Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit of the WoW podcast, Blue Please on CynicalBrit.com. Welcome to a Wipe-a-thon 3000 presentation for Atramedes in the Blackwing Descent. This is the second boss, and he is a blind dragon. He's one of the most interesting encounters I've done so far. He's got this really cool gimmick to him, and because he's blind, he can't actually see you, as you might imagine. So he locates you kind of like a bat. He uses sound to try and locate you, and what you have is, I would call it a sound bar, but that's not all that accurate. It's more like a sound blob, and if this bar fills up to full, you're dead. Basically, he finds you, and he bombards you with fireballs, which will completely destroy you. It's a little unpleasant. So you're going to see that as part of my UI. In the first wipe, this is going to be completely blind at 100%. We didn't read any guides or anything here. And you'll also notice that my quartz casting bar ends up overwriting that. I move it for the future wipes. Okay, now what does this guy do? Oh, there you go. You can see right there, that circle in the middle of the screen. That is your sound blob. If you get all the way to the edge of that, you might as well say goodbye to your character, because you are going to get absolutely destroyed. Now, what he's going to do is he's going to use a variety of abilities that will increase that sound bar. There's that AoE one right there that you cannot avoid, that pulse. You are going to take sound from there. There's no way of avoiding him. He then has something called a Sonic Breath, which is going to target one member of the raid, and then he's going to rotate in a random direction, kind of like the Mimiron Beam. He's either going to go left or he's going to go right, so you've got to be pretty quick on that one. He also sends these random sonic discs out, which will pass through people and generate a huge amount of sound if you actually get hit by them. You can see it going up right there as we ended up doing that. Now, in the ground phase, he's going to do one of these each time. It's called a Searing Flame. Searing Flame, if not interrupted, is going to kill you. Now, the question is, how do you interrupt it? Well, I showed you it right there. You see those 8... They look like gongs. They're actually ancient dwarven shields around the room. What you do is, you strike the shield, and that will stun him for a couple of seconds. It'll interrupt whatever it is he's doing, and it will reset the sound bar of everyone in the raid. The problem is, once you've used it, he'll locate it and melt it. So you only have 8 of those in total to survive the entire fight. Now, that was phase 1. He transitions between a ground phase and an air phase, and he does different things each time. There are quite a few tricky things to do in this fight, as well as the fact that you have to be very, very aware of your own personal surroundings and make sure that you avoid taking as much damage as possible. The more damage you take in this fight, the more sound you are going to get, and things will get very unpleasant for you if you get 100% sound. Okay, let's go on to the second wipe. Now, we had a look at a guide at this point. We always tend to go in blind the first time, just so we can have a look at the fight, and then we'll have a look at a guide, see what's going on with it, learn the abilities, and then try to progress. Seems to be the best way of doing things. Okay, wipe 2. Now, what we did on this attempt is we assigned one person to stand near a gong at all times. And in this case, that is actually me. So I'm going to move over here so I'm nice and close to one of the gongs, and we're going to use the gong when he does his Searing Flame. Now, you'll see there the pulses and the breath, which you've got to watch out for. Those discs can actually spawn under people, which is a total pain in the ass, but they're inert for a few seconds, so you can get out of the way. The problem with this fight is that it's very picky about your positioning. What you're going to see is if you are too far away, then you run a greater risk of being hit by the conal breath, because, hey, it's a cone, it's wider at the edges, so you're going to have to run quite quick in order to get away from it. The closer you are, the easier it is to avoid that breath. However, the closer you are, the less chance you have to see those discs coming. They do move in a very linear fashion. Once they pick their path, they don't deviate from it. They don't home on anything. They just fly out. Okay, so we survived phase 1 mostly. We're on phase 2 right here. So what he's going to do is he's going to drop more discs on the floor, and then he's going to fire a fireball into them. If you get hit by it, that's a ton of damage, and you are going to get a lot of sound. This is his most dangerous attack right here. He's got a nasty beam of death. It's a sonic beam. It's going to speed up, kind of like the spikes on a new Barak. It's going to speed up and keep speeding up, and if it hits you, you're going to take a ton of sound and a massive amount of damage. And you see there, it completely and totally wrecked me. We had a lot of trouble with that mechanic in the first few attempts on this. Indeed, actually, until we nailed this down, we just couldn't beat him. There was just no way. This was the mechanic that absolutely ruined us. And what we had to do was use any kind of ability that gives speed or allows you to travel faster. So people have been wondering exactly what the use of something like the Priest's Life Grip or so-called leap of faith ability is? Well, the ability will actually allow you to drag someone across and away from that beam, as well as give them a speed boost. There's also one of the priest abilities. When you cast a power word shield on someone, it'll make them faster. I actually have an ability which allows me to blink and get a temporary boost of speed. So anything you have to get away from that beam is very important. You also need to be careful where you drag it, because if you drag it through people in the raid, then they're going to take lots of damage and sound. Now, that beam will not stay on you the entire time. It will change targets a couple of times during the air phase, so as long as you can get away from it, then you're fine. However, if you're in an emergency situation and you just can't get away from it, you can use a gong. Just bear in mind that you only have 8 of them total. Now, what is vitally important on this particular fight is that you communicate. If your soundbar is getting very, very high, then you must, and I do mean must, communicate with your raid. You've got to say, we need a gong right now. It's much better to use a gong and not have it later than have a dead raid member. This doesn't have an enrage timer, but it does have what you could consider to be a soft enrage, i.e., you have to use a gong on the Searing Flames. You just can't avoid it, and the chances are you're going to end up using a gong at some other time during the fight as well. So what you have to do is ensure that you bring him down before you run out of gongs. So that's your soft enrage, and that enrage is going to depend very much on just how good your raid is. The more of these things you avoid, and the less sound that you build up, the better. It is possible that you'll only have to use the gong on the ground phase. That's the ideal situation. Indeed, there is an achievement for not getting anyone over 50% sound. That's going to be really challenging, no doubt about that one. A lot of the deaths in this phase were caused either by the breath or by the sonic beam in the air phase. The breath, as we discovered, is unpleasant to be targeted by if you are too far away from him. If you're standing at maximum range and he targets you with the breath, then it becomes RNG as to whether or not you can actually get away from it, because you're going to run right or you're going to run left, and he may go left, he may go right, and if you're on the outer edge of the cone, that cone is going to move. It doesn't move faster, of course, but it moves faster relatively, because it's got a much wider area of effect and it's going to swing round. So positioning in this fight is vital. As to what the ideal positioning is, that's just going to have to be something you work out for yourselves, because it's going to depend on who ends up being at the outermost. Say, if I'm at the outermost edge of the breath, I can get away fairly easily because I can blink, or I can blink through the breath, which would be ideal because then I have to move less and I'm able to focus more DPS. However, if you have people on the outside, like say the Moonkin, that has absolutely no reliable way of escaping from that breath without shapeshifting, then you're going to be in trouble, and that's something you really have to avoid. Now, this fight is not all that easy, honestly. We did manage to kill it, and of course the kill video is coming up later on my channel, but there is so much stuff going on that you just have to be really, really aware of your surroundings. You can end up getting tunnel vision here, and I'm definitely guilty of that in this particular attempt. Hell, I really was not happy with my performance here at all. I was mucking up way too much. You get freaked out by fights like this because there's a lot of things flying around the place. You've got to avoid the discs. You've got to make sure you click the gong at the right time. You've got to be aware of things like the beam and, of course, things like the breath. And all the time, of course, you're trying to also focus DPS and making sure you're doing the best possible DPS, not missing cooldowns and things like that, and then you end up in huge amounts of trouble. Hell, I think at one point I ended up panicking and hitting Frost Nova instead of Blink, which was incredibly dumb of me, but hey, there you go. So, we're sort of getting it here, but we're really hung up on that beam phase, and we do get better at that simply by using those abilities. We asked our Shadow Priest to respec to Holy, which she was more than happy to do, and she started using Life Grip. So she was assigned to keep an eye on the beam targets. So if the beam target was getting too close to the beam, then she would Life Grip them away from the beam, and then the beam would be rendered inert at least for a little while, which would make that air phase an awful lot easier. If you don't have something like that and you end up getting beams on people that don't have a good escape mechanism, then you are going to end up with an awful lot of problems. You can negate it, I might add. It is possible to negate it. You just need to make sure you're using those gongs. And honestly, I wouldn't necessarily just have one person near the gong. I'd maybe have a couple of people. People with some reliable escape mechanism. Like I say, a mage is very handy for that as well. Oh god, that's what happens, by the way, when you get hit by full sound. I got caught in those area of effects multiple times. Hey look, full sound, dead. You are completely dead. He will fireball you. This is such a great fight, though. It's really, really fun, and I love the sound mechanic. It's so original. It's a great fight. It's quite challenging, and it's not mega hard by any stretch. And as I say, we did down him in the same night. It just took us an hour and a bit's worth of attempts to manage it. But it's not easy either, and it's going to keep you on your toes, and it's going to keep you aware of your surroundings, which is a good skill to learn for future tier raiding. My name's been TotalBiscuit. I'll be back with the kill video very shortly on Atramedes, and I'll see you next time.